Welcome again to Her God, a program for women, by women, and about women's issues. We thank God that we are bringing this program to you, and we have a very important topic for you women, young women, women moving abroad. Our topic today is going to cover all of the surprises and shocks of those of you who are planning to leave your country and move to another country. We have with us to discuss this topic two women who have lived abroad. Dr. Cynthia Felix, who's joining us again. She lives in Cochin with her husband. And Bindu Joseph, who is a social worker working at our de-addiction center. So Dr. Cynthia lived in the United States for several years, and Bindu Joseph lived in the UK for several years. So we are going to hear from them about their adjustment. And this issue is very important to us as Christians, as the Word of God advises. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17 onwards, and also Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 32, we hear the warnings for the people of God before they move into the promised land, where they're going to encounter a different culture. And the Lord warns them, do not say to yourself, my power and my hand have gotten me this wealth, but remember the Lord your God. So the Catholic Catechism also tells us that the culture around us can be very toxic to our family lives. In Article 1656, in our own time, in a world often alien and even hostile to faith, believing families are of primary importance as centers of living, radiant faith. So we're going to look at the challenges of living abroad, as well as some of the dangers to our personal faith and our family life. And so I think we'll start with Dr. Cynthia. Maybe you can just share with us, what was your experience? Maybe the shocks, the things that you can share with us about this for women moving abroad.
It's interesting to talk about this topic because it's a mixed bag as far as I'm concerned. And first of all, I want to thank the Lord Jesus for giving me an opportunity to get an experience in the US. It really made me open my eyes to the basic fact that we are all sojourners on this planet Earth at the end of the day, and that our eternal home is our real home. And regardless of which place in the world we are in, as long as we fix our eyes on Jesus, that is what will really make a difference. And these are just subjective experiences we have along the way as we journey on.
So where did you live in the U.S.? You lived on the East Coast, or?
I have been in, I've lived in a couple of different places. One was in the state of New York, and also in North Carolina, which is where I was last before I came back to India.
Was that for your internship, your medical?
I was doing my medical training, my postgraduate medical training, yes. So the other fact that I wanted to bring up was also that the experiences really also would differ based on your background when you're going there, whether you're moving as a family or if you're going by yourself. I myself, when I had first gone there, was a young girl going there as a student. And after that, I went on to do my residency training. So that is an extra challenge in itself if you go there as a young girl or boy, just completed your college essentially in India. So the things that you need to keep in mind is that you have to be open to the challenges, because people are excited when they're moving to a new country. Probably many of them would dream about it even when they're little kids. And once they get the visa stamped, I mean, you're all excited and you're looking forward to the travel. But I think the main point that we need to discuss here, especially on the show, would be to be prepared for the challenges ahead. And I would suggest that you talk to your friends, talk to your relatives, talk to others who have already been in the country before in your shoes, or similar to the position. So if you're a family, talk to some families. If you're going as a student, talk to other students, probably from your own home country, to understand what to expect, especially within the state that you're going to. Because even in the US, as you'd know, each state would have its own flavor.
So you're in college life? You went into college life there in the United States?
Yes.
You're in the college life. So what did you notice maybe like initially on maybe how people relate to each other that was difficult to adjust to? Did you have a difficulty with that?
Well, initially, yes. The initial few days were quite a challenge. Probably it took me probably 6 months or so to, in fact, get in tune with the culture and the system. I would say the differences comes under different categories. One would be physical, meaning the climate is different. You have to be prepared for the weather.
Bindu saying, the climate.
Yes. This climate was also very difficult for me to adjust with.
Snow and
the snowfall and the extreme cold, the freezing cold, you know.
Yeah. Especially people coming from the tropics. I mean, it was my first snow that I got to see in the US. So that's one. And then the food, that's quite different. So initial days, it was a challenge for myself too. And then emotionally, you go through the ups and downs, the ups that you're in a country that you always wanted to go to, or a developed country if you're coming from a developing country. The fun part of it, so you're excited, but at the same time, if you're by yourself as a student, then you face loneliness, you face the cultural challenges. That could make you emotionally drained out. The work environment, which is quite different from what you're used to back home. The work hours. In the US,
so maybe you can share with, what is the difference between the work hours and the work environment? What can you just tell them about?
The work hours, the main thing is that the work there starts quite early. In India, often the work starts by 10 o'clock. The Indian Standard Time, the government office hours start by 10. So there, everything starts quite early. So you have to hit the traffic by 5, 6 in the morning to reach your place of work by 7 or 8. So you have to start your day quite early, and that means the food again would differ because you have to get your breakfast much in advance of what you're used to in India, things like that. And within the work environment, there are pluses and minuses that I felt. The pluses would be, I felt people are quite informal. For instance, even if it's your boss, for instance, in India, in the medical system, we call many of our bosses, meaning the professors, we call them sirs, name and sir. For instance, if it's Dr. John, we call them John sir. But in the US, you could just call them by their first name. We just call them John, which was, it took me a while.
Is it the same in the UK?
Yes. They're called by first name, and just really totally different from our culture, no? So we usually call by sir, madam, and but they are really informal because we usually give the respect, but there is respect, but not showing that much.
How did you see the respect is shown there to help people moving into jobs?
They are very cooperative. That is the first. They are ready to help. Ready to help.
Not standing above everyone.
Yes. That's so. They are really helping, and they are very cooperative and.
The hierarchy, I was going to say that. So there I noticed that there is not so much of a hierarchy between doctors, nurses, and the paramedical staff. If someone were to sit down in scrubs together, you wouldn't know who is a doctor or a nurse.
That's a really positive side of that culture. I think very positive side of the culture, because we have got that hierarchy here. If there's a doctor, he or she will get the respect, and if there's a sweeper, then they won't get. So that is a very positive side of that culture.
In the Western culture,
the
housekeeper gets the same respect as everyone else.
Exactly.
And professional in terms of applying for a leave or the expected amount of work you're supposed to do. Everything is well defined, and you're informed in advance what you're expected to do and things of that nature. So it's in many ways it's easier to work within the institution once you get used to it.
You get some training, I think, right?
Once you get used to it. I think the challenge is the transition part, the initial part. If you can tide over, let's say, the first 6 to 12 months, it would become much easier, because by then you would have your social circle with the natives. And that would be quite helpful. To me, I have to thank the Lord, because my big source of support was my God-given family there, which included a whole bunch of Christian friends, mostly elderly women, I have to say. And I have to, if they're watching, perhaps I'd like to thank Marilyn, Mary Finch.
These are people in the United States?
Yes. There were some of the earlier ones who had supported me when I went there as a student.
So I just have one question, though, because you went how old were you when you went? 19?
I was in my early 20s.
So what about, now this is also a very important issue, like the relationships between boys and girls, was I know that some girls would come to me and they would say, I had to explain to them, he's trying to get you to go out with him. Don't go in his car alone with him. He's going to take you somewhere. I had to explain to her, you don't have to do that even if he's your boss. I had to explain that he's trying to go make a date with you. So did you find there was a naivety there?
I think people are naive in that sense because you're not used to the culture and you just don't know. You don't want to offend people and you probably wouldn't know what they mean. The cultural difference is there. And, in India, if you're used to, even if you grew up in a co-ed institution in India, the system is different there. And the other thing too is there, when people are dating, they don't look at the age difference. So it's quite common that an older person would, like to have a younger woman as a date. So you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know if someone is seeing you as a friend or in a different way. So, you have to seek the Lord's wisdom, I guess, and discernment.
Well, I think it's wise that you chose to have some friends that were older women who could guide you in that area, because there's a lot of naivete in the young girls even young boys, going to the Western countries. Just because of that, people will take advantage of you. You see, that's an older gentleman trying to take advantage of a younger girl who's trying to just be pleasing and cooperative. So we have to be careful, So can you share with us your experience also in the UK?
Yeah, sure.
It's a different kind of work, so we can see.
Thank you very much, Anne Maria, for inviting me for this session. And I lived in UK from 2006 to 2013 and worked as a social worker. When I moved to there, I also faced the problems, challenges like cultural differences, food problems, but I moved with my husband and my brother and family was there, so they are so supporting. And I worked as a social worker, so I had to deal with a lot of social problems, and I worked in a psychiatric hospital for children also. So there is a lot of positive sides, as Dr. Sidhya mentioned, about there is no hierarchy of the jobs, the profession, and the people are very cooperative. But there is, I can say that it is negative aspects, but there was some aspects which really shocked me, like the breakdown of as a social worker. I worked as a social worker, and as a social worker, the breakdown of the family system, people just starting living together without a wedlock, and then when they are not able to adjust with each other, they just separate.
Even if they're married?
Yes, and without wedlock, they just start living together, and when they are not able to adjust with each other, they just separate, and the kids suffering. And they also have problems.
They have children like that too, without marriage?
Yes.
So that's a common thing in the United States too,
yes.
people experimenting with living together, having children,
yes.
having no religion.
And our people, when people move to UK and our children are born and brought up there, and they are confused which culture they have to follow, because they are living in that mainstream and they have to follow that culture, but they are confused. So, because their parents are insisting to follow that Indian culture, but they are living there. So that is a couple of things which made me really shocked when I moved.
That's what I saw when I was in the U.S. Near the Indian communities, and I was teaching some catechism classes to the children. But it's true of any culture coming into a mainstream culture, Mexican, Filipino, the parents don't realize they're coming from their country with their own values and their own orientation on life, and they were raised a certain way, but they don't realize that now their children going to school are going to be reshaped in a culture that they don't agree with in all the different ways that are being taught to them. And so, as Bindu was saying, the children get confused. So they suffer a lot of stress because they have to adjust to the culture as little children, and then mom and dad are expecting certain behaviors. Then what happens is they'll get older and there will be a rebellion. And so we can't get so angry at the children because they're under a huge burden of stress trying to adjust. And yet we have to supervise that they don't adjust to immoral behaviors. So maybe you can talk about a little bit of the moral breakdown of the family and what you observed working in the psych hospital or?
Yeah, because I was working with children, and most of the people came there with the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And all this caused because of the breakdown, most of this breakdown of the family system, because 50% of the children were abused. I mean, with sometimes with the mom's boyfriend, family relative, and I think it's all because of
Sexual
these,
abuse? Or?
Yes, really sexually abused. Okay.
That's a common thing too when there's boyfriends, girlfriends coming in and out of the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was teaching in 3rd grade and the girl was telling it, sharing. She was at sharing time, she was telling about her dad's girlfriend and her mom's boyfriend, and she was going to her dad's girlfriend's house and her mom's, and I thought, all these children are listening to this. So this is another thing we don't expect. Our children are going to school with children that are teaching them a whole different moral culture.
Moral culture, yes.
Personally, I think eventually you would be able to form your own friend circle. You could pick and choose, obviously, once you know what's out there. So I think the big challenge is, again, the initial days. Again, I urge, especially if people are going as students or by themselves, both boys and girls, my advice would be, number one, be clear about what to expect. Because many people go with a flowery dream, which is a different situation from what you are saying, where you have a family system established already. But in India, especially from the states of Kerala, I know the former Andhra Pradesh, the district of Hyderabad, or the area of Hyderabad rather. So from those areas, there are many, many Indian students, especially going to the US. Yeah. And people are prepared for their studies. The parents would focus on what they need to study and all that. But the living system, where are they going to stay, or what, what are the options out there for food, for instance? The initial several days, I mean, I couldn't even quite have enough food because I just didn't know, how to, because you won't have transportation, you wouldn't know where to go get food, very simple practical things. So to plan in advance, I guess there should be some arrangement even through the Indian consulate or something within India. I think that would help, or some NGOs or, those organizations, because people, especially the Indian parents, are so focused on just the education part. So that they would have a social status in telling others that, their son or daughter has gone to the US. And
Did you live in the dormitory?
Yes.
Now, life in the dormitory is also
very
quite
challenging.
shocking.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
So maybe tell some shocks so that they know. What are some shocks?
Well, it's essentially what you see in the movies. That's where I guess.
Well, so the boys and girls are actually having sex in the evenings. I mean, I'm sorry, but this is what is the pastime.
And the common rooms, many of the rooms, for instance, the bathing areas, even within the girls' dorms, people would bully each other, or you would have a common shared kitchen or shared bathrooms with other girls. I mean, but still, the culture. And then if you are coming from, let's say, India or China, you could be treated different from.
But you get your own little group, yeah. But still, even for American parents, they're not realizing, even with some Catholic universities, the cultural life within the dorms is causing extreme problems for their children, moral problems and addictions to alcohol and drugs. These things are going on. So these children have to be fully prepared to say no to drugs and alcohol and parties.
Yeah.
And, what are our sexual boundaries? I think parents have to have a real good talk with their youth.
Yeah.
Or they're going to ruin their lives going over there.
Yeah. And that's the point I was trying to make, because the parents are super excited about their kid going abroad and earning a degree and whatnot. That would sometimes become their focus, whereas this, the personal life is quite important. And I agree, it's up to the parents to ensure that they have the right environment so that they can flourish. And
I think it's important, like you said, have a relative or someone there that
arranged in advance.
It's a very lonely culture.
Them.
It's also, I mean, tell us your experience of feeling the loneliness of that type of a culture. I want everyone to know. What is the loneliness experience that UK and West is? I know you're just alone a lot more, right?
Again, I tend to agree and disagree. In one sense, yes, because extended family system is not there. and people have accepted it now. I disagree in the sense it's again your choice. I have seen, for instance, elderly women who would socialize, who would, it depends really on their attitude.
I mean,
Some
for
people would
for the Indian going to the West, I've heard a lot that it's very lonely and they're not used to being so alone all the time.
Yeah, and initially, yes, you would feel that, but then I also feel you're going to another country, so you're expecting to mingle with people of another culture. And when you're open to that, and this is why I wanted
But when elderly people are moving, they will have the problem of the language also.
The elderly,
language,
that's true.
the
If it's
language.
a mother, if it's your parents
Yes,
coming
yeah.
over, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Actually, that's actually an issue. Have you had experience of that?
Yes, a lot of Malayali families face that because when they need their parents, the parents are coming there, and because they are not able to mingle with the society, because of the language problem.
So they're alone in the home, or
yeah,
they're
yes,
alone.
they are alone, really alone in the home.
Yeah, that's an important issue too. How do we take care of them when they can't mingle so much, when they're alone in the home and all?
The language I understand could be a barrier, but in the context of what I experienced, I feel sometimes, and this is something I've seen often among Indian students and Chinese students, they do tend to form groups within their own culture. But that is also why it's important to be a good Christian. And that is what helped me. Eventually, I understood that the whole purpose of being in the U.S. is that you can mingle with the culture you're going to, and not just completing a degree.
I think it's also a matter of population, though, because you can just. It always shocks me when I first go back to the United States and we're driving down the road and you look and there's no people anywhere. There's no people. You don't see.
Yeah,
I would tell my mother or my family, I would say, if we were in India, I would see people everywhere, but here, no one is here. And when the snow comes, you never see anyone. They're in the house all the time. So it's a shock, it's an adjustment.
Yeah, but just so that people appreciate what the U.S. culture is, I wanted to add the other side as well, because I have experienced a snowstorm, for instance, when I was in when I was in New York. In fact, it was a horrible storm, like 6 feet of snow or something. But then people helped each other, even with food and things. Like you were saying earlier, once you open up, I think it's more of an emotional barrier rather than a physical barrier. Once you are open, because they're also nervous, how to interact with a new Indian. And I think in some ways, if you're a student, you're at an advantage because you are young and you're still moldable and you're open. Once I opened up to, the natives, in fact, the majority of my friends in the US are Native Americans, whites, Hispanics, African Americans. So once you open up to them, you experience who they are and the true US culture and what it stands for. And I personally feel it's a very, very friendly culture. If you're open to talking to people and being friends with them, they're helpful and honest. I've found most people to be honest. Even if you don't agree to everything they say or their values or whatnot, but they're upfront and quite honest. And
I don't know about the honesty, but but it's true. You look and it seems so cold, but the people themselves there'll always be people helping you. It's true.
The British culture also, the people are very helping and cooperative. But when our people are moved to the British culture, they keep a separate identity. I think they have got their own associations, and I found that in UK. I think the same with the US also, because when people, Malayalis and the people move to the countries, they keeps a separate identity, and they. Isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I meant. It's more of an emotional barrier. If you truly want to experience the culture, though, if you're open. In fact, I go to travel. When you ask me the locations, I was even thinking, because I've traveled. Probably I never could have done that in India. For instance, as a young girl driving a car, it was quite safe for me to drive a car and travel across the country. I did have a friend come with me. She was a better driver. She shared part of the drive. But, once I got used to it, I've driven across pretty much the whole of the U.S. And visited different cultures in different states. And it's quite safe to do so. I mean, you have to be wise again and be, have your common sense. But what I'm trying to say is it's a culture wherein if you really get into the nitty-gritties of it, because many times Indians focus more on the educational part and not on the wholesome, comprehensive
Right, they'll have one focus, I want this
Yeah.
job, right?
Yeah.
I want this job, or of course you have a goal, you have a job or a degree you want to get. But I think we have to be aware of that there are many different dangers and hidden difficulties in moving abroad that need to be addressed. And I think cultures, sticking together close with family and people of the like mind also ensures your mental health and your psychological health and your moral strength, your moral strength, and to gather maybe some wise, trustworthy people in that culture to discuss, this and this is going on, what does that mean? Someone you can confide in, what does this mean? Just as I do when I come here to India, I have to ask someone, what does that mean? So that I can trust that I won't go astray, or lose my faith. And always the Catholic Church is a good place to find such people. When you go to church and you can find a home there.
Yes.
Wherever you go, you can always find a home in your church. So we want to encourage all of you who are making plans to go abroad to do an investigation and prayer and to feel that God is going with you. Perhaps you have a mission to spread the good news into that new place where you are going. And we thank you, Bindu and Dr. Cynthia, for joining us. And do hope that you'll return next week for another important topic we will discuss on Her God. Thank you for coming.